Welcome everybody to this edition of Attention Talk Video. I'm your host, ADHD and Attention Coach Jeff Copper. I also need to start remembering to add cognitive engineer because that's what we're talking about today. Really quickly, I've engineered a new field of engineering and a new ADHD intervention called cognitive ergonomics from the inside out. This is not coaching. This isn't therapy. It's an engineering approach to helping those with ADHD. It's built on Dr. Russell Barkley's definitions of ADHD as an executive functioning impairment and sticks very specifically to his itemization executive functions and what they are. And real quickly, executive functions are a collection of mind tools that you use to solve problems. As I've studied his model and built cognitive ergonomics from the inside out, this new model reveals lots of anomalies that the current interventions or the current mindset can't explain. I recently came out in October, making more of a formal announcement of this new intervention. And then recently I've been giving live streams like I am right now to talk about what the model reveals and really try to help begin to understand like how really cool this thing really is. And today, what I wanted to do is I wanted to walk through the concept of almost everything you do it instinctively for a cognitive reason. And what I want to notice is that people will have tendency to look at behavior and think that it's wrong. What the model does is it helps to begin to understand what's right, like the legitimate reason why you do what you do. Now, hold this important. Water runs downhill because it's the path of least resistance. Instinctively, we do things because we're rewarded with higher levels of performance. So you have to understand that the brain, in one sense, is really kind of inefficient. So again, what I want to do is share some things that are legitimate, kind of hidden in plain sight, that this model reveals to kind of illuminate the power of it. So the first thing I want to do is talk about executive functions, a collection of mind tools that we use to solve problems. Part of executive function, there's a group of them that's really working memory. And more specifically, there's verbal working memory, which basically is self-talk. We all have a narrative that's going on inside of our head. Well, because it's impaired, many people with ADHD, they have a tendency to talk a lot. In fact, sometimes they're told that they actually talk too much and they suppress it. In the world of coaching, we often call these people verbal processors. In other words, what they're doing is thinking out loud. Think of it like this. They're not actually talking to themselves inside their head like a neurotypical would. They actually have to physically say the words. Now, understand that nobody taught them how to do this, right? They've instinctively done it over a period of time because they're rewarded with higher levels of performance. That's not accountability. It's not a tip, trick, or strategy. It's an accommodation that they've adapted, right, for the impairment, right? In fact, people will come to me and say, but I don't want to talk out loud. And I'll say, well, I can't help you because it's going to impair your ability to process information, to think, and to problem solve. What you need to own it and actually ask, can I think out loud, or go to people? Again, nothing's changed. There's not tip, trick, or strategy. It's just how your brain works naturally. And the idea is to own it. Another thing the model talks about is when you are doing anything, you have to retrieve existing knowledge. Think of like the back of your head as a filing cabinet. There's different ways to retrieve knowledge. One is what we call free recall. It just comes from the blue. Honestly, it really doesn't happen that much. It can happen. There's also what we call cued recall, which is there's something that prompts you to retrieve the knowledge. And another one is recognition recall. If I asked you who was on the face of a $100 bill, you might not know it off the top of your head. But if I showed you a $100 bill, you'd recognize it. So with that being said, often you'll ask somebody with ADHD a question. Have you ever noticed that some people will tell a story? Understand that they need to tell the story because the story helps them actually walk through how to retrieve the knowledge. Now, I think it's still up, but if you go to Netflix and you search for Explain the Mind, I think it's the second episode, they talk about people that can memorize like 5,000 numbers within 5 or 10 minutes. And they talk about how to do that. They think of it in terms of a story. They walk around the block and they imagine it. That's the way they retrieve the specificity of the numbers. What I'm saying is a lot of people with ADHD is they have to tell you a story and get to the answer. What's also interesting is if you interrupt them, they often have to start back at the beginning of the story because they kind of lose their train of thought. Where they are in the story evaporates and they've got to start over again. What I'm trying to illustrate is this is an adaptive reason why they do it. It's in order for them to answer your question. If you try to say bottom line it, they probably wouldn't be able to do it on the spot because they have to tell the story for the recall. Another thing the model talks about is whenever you're going to problem solve or do anything, you have to begin to familiarize yourself with all the relevant information that you need before you can begin to problem solve. This is what you would say, I'm having a hard time getting into the flow. Getting into the flow is that period of time of getting that knowledge in. So a lot of people will come to me and they say, you know, I have lists all over the place. In fact, I make a list every day. They're inferring that they need to refer back to that list every day as if it's a reminder. I would argue no. What they're doing is the act of writing down what they need to do that day is familiarizing themselves with what they need to do. If they did it the night before, it wouldn't do any good because when they woke up in the morning, the day would have evaporated. They would have had to do it all over again. Again, many people think that they are doing something wrong. And I'm saying, no, this is the legitimate reason why you do it. And you need to do it every day. In fact, if you don't, you'll find that your day is a little bit of a challenge. Also, other things, and I can speak to this, is they don't do things until deadline. And there's a couple sides of this. Number one, I do a lot of presentations, and for some of my major ones, particularly in person, it's rarely that I ever finish the presentation until the day of. So I've had, during COVID, I actually had a couple presentations I do where I had to tape them in the summer that were going to air like in November. By the time it came around, I didn't even remember what I said. I had to go back and watch what I said a couple times in order to be able to come on and answer questions. So the day of a presentation, when I'm in the physical company summit, I'm often reviewing that presentation and making some tweaks. A few things that are happening. One, I'm familiarizing myself with the information, and I'm retrieving existing knowledge of things that might have changed since I originally kind of conceived the idea. For me, there's really no way around it. Now, there's some presentations I've done over and over and over, or like this, I'm speaking on bullet points. But if it's relatively new for me, I can't not do it to the last minute because I have to become familiar with the material. In other words, I got to get my game face on, got to take my ankles, kind of get ready for what I'm doing. Again, can't not do it. A lot of people with ADHD also say, if it wasn't for the deadline, I couldn't get it done. Now, this does not work if you're missing deadlines. However, I've coached a lot of people. If you want to know what your most efficient cognitive process is, go look at how you think through and how you solve problems at the deadline. Because by definition, you have to go to whatever is the most efficient. So I tell this story frequently. I was coaching a gentleman one time, and in working with him, I'm a verbal processor. He talks out loud. And then one day he came in and he said, oh my God, I had this big presentation last week. If it wasn't for the deadline, it wouldn't happen. And I said, that's a bunch of bull. He said, no, seriously, Jeff. I said, no, what did you do? He said, well, I had to call my team into a conference room. I said, yeah, you talked like 96, 98% of the time. He said, but I'm the leader. I said, no, you weren't. You were just talking out loud to everybody. And after a moment, he goes, oh, but Jeff, I can't do that every time I have a deadline. I go, what do you mean you can't? That's what you do all the time. And then you begin to realize, oh, I'm using the deadline to justify bringing all my staff into the room. I go, well, you can think of it like that. But the idea really is, if you want to know what works, that does, right? So often people, it's the deadline. No, it's not the deadline. It's you regress to whatever is the most efficient in that particular moment. And if you want to know what your process, just study yourself at that point in time. Another thing about, I talked about cued recall earlier, all right? Cued recall is, you can't remember something when you need it without a cue. So think of a reminder. I'm going to leave a reminder out on the kitchen counter to take it with me to work. That cue, when you go by it, that reminder cues your mind, oh, I need to take this. Well, people with ADHD, they need those cues in order to retrieve the knowledge that they have. Because if they don't have those cues, it's out of sight, out of mind. This would explain why people with ADHD have like 50 or 60 browser tabs open. Each tab represents either something that they need to do, something that's unfinished, or something that there's some ambiguity and they don't know what to do with it. If they were to close the browser tab, they would not remember it to go back to it. So they don't close it for those particular reasons. Again, this is all based on the cognitive reason, because if your executive functions are impaired, these are accommodations that's hidden in plain sight. Now, often people with ADHD will leave things out on counters and things like that. A lot of times people with ADHD, they have everything out as a reminder of stuff that they need to do. Now, granted, when you have too much stuff out, you see all that work, you get a feeling overwhelming because you have more to do than you got time. That will throw you into a fight, flight, or freeze state. You can't remember what to do. But the trick really is to understand, if you have ADHD, if you got it all put away, you would probably forget about it, but you can't have everything out. So a lot of times you got to come up with those ideas where you can bring the stuff out. Like I've had people before where we put a lot of things they need to do on a bookshelf, and we put a curtain, and we would open the curtain at certain times so they could see it and then close it so they didn't feel overwhelmed. Not seeing much of this in the self-help section of the bookstore now, are you? You're not, because this is what the model is teaching us in order to problem solve. Now, there's another thing I was kind of going back to. I want to go back to what I said earlier about verbal processing. Understand that language came about as a need. People began to communicate because they needed to manipulate other people to get what they wanted. In other words, I'm hungry. I got to kill that thing that's faster and bigger than I am. I need the other person to go on the other side and work with me to kill that thing so that we can eat. So we began to communicate out of a need to get things that we wanted. Now, when we communicate, we're talking out loud. We go to school and we talk to teachers. We talk to other students because that's how we learn and digest information. It's been going on ever since we began to talk. So many accommodations, like talking to people or collaborating, and to a certain extent talking out loud, has been around since we began to communicate. These are accommodations for executive function impairment. That's everywhere. It's hidden in plain sight. But nobody's ever been able to develop a model to legitimize this and explain it. So neurotypicals use everything that I've described. It's just people with ADHD, because of the impairment, they might need it 5 or 10 times more than what a neurotypical would. So the cool thing about cognitive ergonomics, it's an engineering model that brings legitimacy to the executive functions. Thank God Dr. Barkley has defined them with specificity so that we can understand cause and effect of certain things that people do behaviorally, with outcomes like talking out loud or browser tabs open or telling stories, so that we can begin to identify these are legitimate accommodations for the impairment that are totally hidden in plain sight. But everybody judges people with ADHD as lazy or unmotivated. One of the exercises that I do is to help bring tangibility to it is I'll have somebody prepare a meal, eat a meal, and clean a meal up using their less dominant hand. Now, normally, if you would do that on your own, you'd say, oh, that was frustrating, was awkward. But within cognitive ergonomics, using attention scope's a collection of simulations that we use to bring tangibility to Dr. Barkley's model. So when I put somebody in that, I said, did you see what self-awareness is like? Like, you had to be on guard every moment of that activity, or you would have forgotten it. Oh, by the way, did you get frustrated? Did you notice you had to calm yourself down? Those are 2 executive functions. Oh, you had to restrain your urge to use your dominant hand. That's another executive function. Did you notice that you might have had to visualize yourself holding the knife with the dominant hand to see how you would hold it with your less dominant hand? Again, I've developed attention scope as a means to bring tangibility to Dr. Barkley's model so that we can begin to make objective observation, factual-based observations based off what's going on and not subjective-based observations that people do. And what this is bringing about is we're actually beginning to identify these types of accommodations that are hidden in plain sight. So really, I just wanted to kind of share this information and put it out there. And right now we'll kind of pause. By chance, Pam, do we have any questions out there?
No questions that I see, but Nikki left a comment saying great stuff. And Thor says, I agree. Great advice.
So for those people that are watching and do it subsequently, one of the things about cognitive ergonomics, it's a field of engineering. I've developed it. I can't own it. It's really a concept. I'm trying to get to teachers, disability specialists, HR people, administrators, school people to bring some legitimacy, because my goal is at some point in time, schools and workplaces would be required to provide these type of accommodations as a requirement for people so they don't have to change their behavior. So if you can, please help spread the word for people to go check this out. If you actually are interested, again, I teach cognitive ergonomics because it's an observational training program. You can learn more about it at cognitive-ergonomics.com. And I know Pam has put some links of that into our description. So for those that are here, thank you for showing up. For those that will see this in the comments, I hope this makes some sense to you. I hope you're as excited as I am. And I ask you, please help me spread the word. This is really kind of exciting stuff. It's like a whole new world for the world of ADHD. So thank you for your time. Hope you've enjoyed this edition of Attention Talk Video. Take care.